Tommy and Tuppence, The Orphanage Secret. Welcome to Cafe Tales. I'm Ailey, your host, and I'm so glad to have you with us again. Tonight I have a new question for you. Do you enjoy looking back on your youth? And what was that time like for you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new mysteries every day. Now let's unravel tonight's story together. Chapter 1. Frostbitten Arrival. The carriage wheels crunched through the frozen snow with a sound that reminded Tommy Beresford unpleasantly of bone breaking underfoot. He shifted against the worn leather seat and peered through the frost-clouded window at the approaching edifice of St. Margaret's Orphanage. "Good Lord," he muttered. "The place looks like something out of a Gothic novel. All we need now is a mysterious count and a few bats." Tuppence, bundled in her navy traveling coat, pressed close to the window, her breath creating small clouds of condensation on the glass. "Don't be dramatic, Tommy. It's simply old. Rather handsome, actually, in a grim sort of way. Handsome and grim. That's practically the definition of Gothic, old thing." The orphanage loomed before them, a sprawling manor of red brick with ivy clinging to its walls like skeletal fingers. February had not been kind to the countryside. Snow lay thick upon the ground, transforming the landscape into a study in whites and grays, broken only by the dark smudge of the building itself. The afternoon light, weak and pale, seemed to give up entirely before reaching the structure's upper windows. The carriage lurched to a stop, and Tommy swung open the door, stepping down into snow that came nearly to his ankles. He turned back to assist Tuppence, but she had already jumped down with characteristic independence, landing with a soft crunch beside him. "Frozen confetti," Tommy announced, gesturing at the swirling snowflakes that had begun to fall again. "How festive!" Tuppence shot him a playful smirk. "You're in rare form today? Shall I expect jokes all afternoon, or will you eventually settle into something resembling professional investigation?" "I always take my work seriously, Tuppence. It's everything else I find amusing." The front door of the orphanage opened before they could knock, and a woman emerged, silhouetted against the dim interior light. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back severely, and a dress of unrelieved black that made her appear almost spectral in the snowy landscape. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford." Her voice was pleasant enough, though Tommy detected a note of strain beneath the surface politeness. "I am Mrs. Abernathy, the headmistress. Do come in, please. The weather is quite dreadful." They followed her into an entrance hall that smelled of carbolic soap and boiled vegetables. The interior was no more cheerful than the exterior, dark wood paneling and floors worn smooth by decades of small feet. A single gas lamp flickered near the staircase, casting uncertain shadows. "We received your telegram," Mrs. Abernathy continued, leading them down a corridor. "Though I confess, I'm not entirely certain what assistance you might provide. The circumstances are unusual, but perhaps not as alarming as our benefactor suggested." "Mr. Cast seemed rather concerned when he contacted us," Tuppence said mildly. "Something about irregularities." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned. "Mr. Cast is a generous patron, but he has a tendency toward the dramatic. Still, there have been incidents, small things, really. Nothing I can quite put my finger on." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance. It was precisely this sort of vague unease that often preceded something considerably more concrete. They emerged into what appeared to be the main administrative area, where a small collection of individuals stood in a loose group, clearly assembled for introductions. Mrs. Abernathy performed the honors with practiced efficiency. "This is Mr. Lang, our caretaker. He maintains the building and grounds." The man who stepped forward was perhaps 40, thin and precise in his movements, with a sort of face that suggested he spent considerable time doing mental arithmetic. His handshake was firm but brief. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said, nodding to each in turn. His eyes, Tommy noted, were perpetually worried, darting from face to face as though expecting criticism. And Mrs. Collins, who manages our kitchen and meal planning, Mrs. Collins was a substantial woman with observant gray eyes and capable hands that looked as though they could dispatch a chicken as easily as comfort a crying child. She gave them a thorough looking over before offering a slight smile. "Welcome to St. Margaret," she said. Her voice held the faint burr of Yorkshire, though I can't say the circumstances are ideal for visiting. Finally, our groundskeeper, Oliver. The young man who shuffled forward couldn't have been more than 25. With a shock of untidy brown hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent his days outdoors regardless of season. His eyes were nervous, and he kept glancing toward the windows as though calculating how quickly he might escape outside again. "Please," he mumbled, barely making eye contact. "Oliver has been with us only since October," Mrs. Abernathy added, "but he's proven quite reliable." The headmistress led them through the ground floor, pointing out the nursery, the playroom, and the dining hall. Throughout the tour, Tommy and Tuppence maintained their casual demeanor, asking occasional innocuous questions while their eyes noted everything. In the entrance hall, a chair sat at an odd angle to the wall, as though someone had moved it hurriedly and forgotten to replace it properly. Near the kitchen corridor, faint footprints tracked across the floor, too large to be a child's, too small to be most men's. And in the playroom, visible through the doorway, the playground beyond the windows stood completely still and silent. Untouched snow suggested no children had ventured out for some time. It was Tuppence who spotted the key. They had paused near a window overlooking the side garden, where a small collection of flower pots sat on a shelf, waiting for spring. Behind the largest pot, something metallic caught the light. "What charming pots," Tuppence said brightly, moving closer. "Do the children help with the gardening?" "When weather permits," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "It teaches them responsibility." Tuppence's fingers brushed the key, small and brass, as she examined a pot. She palmed it smoothly, her expression never changing. Tommy, watching from the corner of his eye, felt the familiar thrill of investigation beginning. They completed the tour and were shown to a small office where they might work. As Mrs. Abernathy excused herself to attend to the children's supper, Tommy closed the door and turned to his wife. "Well?" Tuppence produced the key from her pocket, holding it up to the lamplight. One mysteriously placed key, one oddly positioned chair, footprints where there shouldn't be footprints, and 4 staff members, each of whom looked guilty of something, though whether it's petty theft or murder remains to be seen. Don't forget the window in the nursery corridor. Saw it as we passed, slightly open despite the weather, fresh snow on the sill inside. Tuppence's eyes brightened. "Someone's been going in and out, or something has. My money's on someone. Ghosts rarely need to unlock windows, unless they're very corporeal ghosts with a fondness for fresh air." Tommy grinned. "There's the Tuppence. I know. Shall we see what this little key unlocks?" "First thing tomorrow. We shouldn't appear too eager on our first evening. Better to let them grow comfortable with our presence. Wiser as always, darling. Though I suspect comfortable is the last thing certain parties will be feeling tonight." Through the window, darkness was falling rapidly, and with it came more snow, thick and relentless. Somewhere in the building, a child laughed, the sound bright and incongruous against the gathering gloom. Then silence fell again, broken only by the wind howling around the eaves of St. Margaret's Orphanage. Tommy looked at Tuppence, and she looked back at him, and without words, they acknowledged what they both felt, that beneath the surface of this isolated place, something was very wrong indeed. Chapter 2, The Caretaker's Warning. Morning arrived with the grudging reluctance typical of February. The sun, a pale disk, barely visible through layers of cloud. Tommy stood at the window of their modest room, watching the snow continue its relentless descent upon St. Margaret's grounds. The orphanage looked no more welcoming in daylight than it had the previous evening. "Still snowing," he observed. "At this rate, we'll be snowed in by Thursday." Tuppence was already dressed, pinning a hat with practiced efficiency. "Perfect conditions for a mystery, wouldn't you say? No one can leave. No one can arrive. Very Murder on the Orient Express. Except we're not on a train. There hasn't been a murder, and I doubt Mrs. Abernathy would appreciate the comparison." Details. Tommy, mere details. They made their way downstairs, following the smell of porridge and toast to the staff dining room, where Mrs. Collins presided over breakfast with military efficiency. The kitchen matron nodded to them as they entered. "Tea's fresh," she said, gesturing to a large pot. "Help yourselves. We're informal with visitors, provided you don't mind the plainness of it all." "Plain suits us perfectly," Tuppence assured her, pouring tea for them both. They had barely settled when Mr. Lang appeared in the doorway, his thin frame somehow managing to look anxious even in stillness. He glanced around the room as though checking for eavesdroppers, then approached their table with obvious reluctance. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he began, his voice low. "Might I have a word? In private, perhaps." "Here," Tommy said, setting down his cup with deliberate calm. "Or would you prefer somewhere else? The storage room just down the corridor. It's quieter there." They followed him to a small, cluttered space that smelled of dust and old wood. Mr. Lang closed the door carefully before turning to face them, his hands clasping and unclasping nervously. "I should have spoken yesterday," he said without preamble. "But Mrs. Abernathy doesn't like to. That is, she prefers not to acknowledge that anything is amiss." "But something is amiss?" Tuppence prompted gently. Mr. Lang nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing. "For the past 3 weeks there have been occurrences, strange ones. Children going missing for short periods, only to reappear with no explanation of where they've been. Items moved from where I know I left them. And the whispers," Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Whispers in empty rooms? I've heard them myself late at night when I do my final rounds. Voices where there should be none." He paused, then added with obvious embarrassment, "Mrs. Abernathy says I'm imagining things, that I'm letting the isolation get to me. But you don't believe that." Tuppence didn't phrase it as a question. "No, Mrs. Beresford, I don't. I've been caretaker here for 12 years. I know every creak of these floors, every sound the wind makes in the chimneys. This is different." He leaned forward slightly. "And there's something else. Things have gone missing. Small things mostly. A toy from the playroom yesterday. An entire lunch basket that Mrs. Collins had prepared for one of the older children just vanished." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. Her eyes sparkled with a particular interest she reserved for genuinely intriguing puzzles. "Have you noticed any pattern?" Tommy asked. "To the times these incidents occur or to which children might be involved?" Mr. Lang shook his head slowly. "That's just it. There's no pattern I can see. Different children, different times of day. The only constant is that it's been happening more frequently. 3 weeks ago, it was once a week. Now it's nearly every other day. And the whispers," Tuppence said. "What do they say? Can you make out words?" "Sometimes. Once I heard someone say tomorrow quite clearly. Another time it sounded like the old place, or perhaps the cold place. It's difficult to be certain." "We may have a proper ghost then," Tuppence said, her tone deliberately light. She caught Tommy's eye with a look of mock seriousness. "What do you think, darling? Spectral visitation or merely the wind?" Tommy played along, recognizing her strategy to ease the caretaker's obvious distress. "I'm not much for ghosts myself. They seem rather inefficient. If one wanted to haunt a place, Surely one could manage something more dramatic than stealing lunch baskets and moving toys about. Despite his anxiety, Mr. Lang managed a weak smile. You don't believe in such things. Let's say I believe in finding rational explanations first, Tommy replied. Though I promise you we'll investigate every possibility, ghostly or otherwise. Have you mentioned these incidents to anyone else? The other staff members, for instance? I tried speaking with Oliver about the footprints I found near the old groundskeeper's shed. He seemed nervous, said he'd noticed nothing unusual. Mrs. Collins dismissed it when I mentioned the missing basket, said I'd simply miscounted. Mr. Lang's expression grew more troubled. It's as though everyone prefers to pretend nothing is wrong. Or perhaps someone prefers that pretense, Tommy murmured. A bell rang somewhere in the depths of the building, and Mr. Lang straightened abruptly. I must go. The morning inspections won't do themselves. He moved toward the door, then paused. Please, be careful. I don't know what's happening here, but I have a feeling it's building toward something. Something worse. After he left, Tommy and Tuppence remained in the storage room for a moment, processing what they'd heard. Well, Tuppence said finally, that was illuminating and suspicious. Why come to us now? Why not yesterday? Or better yet, why not raise the alarm weeks ago? Fear, perhaps? Or he's genuinely been dismissed by the others. Mrs. Abernethy did seem rather intent on downplaying everything yesterday. Tommy moved to examine the shelves, running his finger along the dusty surface. Whispers in empty rooms, missing children who reappear, vanishing objects. It's all very theatrical. You think someone's staging it, don't you? Too many small incidents, too conveniently mysterious. If you wanted to create an atmosphere of unease without actually doing anything too alarming, this would be precisely how to do it. Tuppence nodded slowly. But why? What's the purpose? Ah, now that's the question, isn't it? Tommy examined a crate near the back wall. Could be a distraction from something else entirely. Or perhaps testing how much one could get away with before serious questions were asked. The missing lunch basket bothers me, Tuppence admitted. That's not mysterious. That's practical. Someone was hungry, or feeding someone else. Someone who shouldn't be here, or someone who is here but shouldn't need extra food. They returned to the main corridor, where sounds of children's voices drifted from the direction of the nursery. Through a doorway, they glimpsed Mrs. Abernethy speaking with a young woman in a nurse's uniform, their heads close together in what appeared to be urgent conversation. Everyone seems to have secrets here, Tuppence observed. Most people do, old thing. The trick is determining which secrets are relevant to our inquiry and which are merely the usual human collection of minor sins and embarrassments. You're very philosophical this morning. The porridge was better than expected. It put me in an expansive mood. They wandered toward the playroom, maintaining their casual air while their eyes catalogued every detail. The room was empty at the moment. Toys arranged with suspicious neatness on the shelves. Through the window, the playground remained untouched, snow covering the swings and climbing frame in smooth white blankets. No one's played outside for days, Tommy said. Weather's bad, certainly. But children usually manage some outdoor time regardless, unless they've been forbidden, or unless someone doesn't want small footprints in the snow revealing where people have actually been. Walking, Tuppence smiled. You're getting rather good at this. Darling, I've had an excellent teacher. Flattery will get you everywhere. I certainly hope so. They turned from the window to find Oliver standing in the doorway, a cap twisted between his nervous hands. He'd clearly been there for some moments, watching them. Begging your pardon, he said quickly. I wasn't eavesdropping, just I saw you come in here and thought perhaps... Well, if you're investigating, maybe you should know. He trailed off, his courage apparently failing him. Yes? Tuppence prompted, her voice encouraging rather than demanding. Oliver glanced over his shoulder, then back at them. "It's probably nothing, but I've seen lights late at night moving in the attic windows, and once I'm sure I saw someone in the old groundskeeper's cottage, though it's meant to be locked up tight." "When was this?" 3 nights ago. The lights, I mean. The cottage. That was maybe a week past? Did you tell anyone?" Oliver shook his head vigorously. "Mr. Lang would have said I was shirking my duties, seeing things to avoid work, and Mrs. Abernathy, she doesn't like complications." Before they could ask more, voices approached from the corridor. Oliver's face went pale. "I've said nothing," he muttered, and fled through a side door that led to the gardens. Tommy looked at Tuppence. "This place is full of people desperate to tell us things, yet terrified of being caught doing so." "Which suggests," Tuppence replied thoughtfully, "that someone here is very good at making people afraid. The question is, who and what precisely are they afraid of?" The voices in the corridor grew louder, accompanied by the sound of small feet running. Whatever peace the morning had held was clearly at an end. "Shall we investigate the attic later?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world, old thing. Though I do hope there are no actual ghosts. I've never been quite clear on the proper etiquette for addressing the supernatural." "I'm sure you'll manage." "Tommy, you always do." They left the playroom together, 2 perfectly ordinary visitors to a perfectly ordinary orphanage, where perfectly extraordinary things were beginning to surface into the light. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Nursery. The nursery occupied the entire eastern wing of the first floor, a long room with windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. By mid-morning, it had transformed into a hive of carefully supervised activity. 20 children, ranging from perhaps 4 to 10 years old, sat at low tables, engaged in what Mrs. Abernathy described as educational play. Tommy and Tuppence had been invited to observe, ostensibly to familiarize themselves with the daily routines. In truth, both recognized it as an opportunity to study the children themselves, though small witnesses who often noticed more than adults gave them credit for. "They seem rather subdued," Tuppence murmured, watching a group of girls arrange wooden blocks with mechanical precision. "Children are usually more boisterous, aren't they?" "Perhaps they're on their best behavior for visitors," Tommy suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't quite believe it. A young woman in a gray dress moved between the tables, offering quiet encouragement. This was Miss Bramley, the junior nurse whom they'd been introduced to briefly at breakfast. She had a gentle manner, though Tommy noticed she jumped slightly at unexpected sounds. Near the back of the room, 3 boys huddled over a puzzle, their heads close together. One whispered something that made the others glance quickly toward the large cupboard that stood against the far wall. It was a furtive look, gone in an instant, but Tuppence caught it. "That cupboard seems to hold a certain fascination," she observed quietly. Tommy followed her gaze. The cupboard itself was unremarkable, painted the same institutional cream as the walls, with brass handles that had dulled with age and use. But now that Tuppence had pointed it out, he noticed that several children seemed acutely aware of its presence, stealing glances at it when they thought no one was watching. They drifted closer, maintaining their casual observer role. As they passed one of the tables, Tommy noticed something odd. Small scratches marred the floor near the cupboard door, fresh enough that the wood showed pale against the older finish. The mark suggested the cupboard had been moved, recently, dragged slightly away from the wall and then pushed back. "Mrs. Beresford," a small voice piped up, Tuppence, turned to find a girl of perhaps 7 looking up at her, with solemn gray eyes. "Are you really a detective?" "We help people solve problems," Tuppence said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because we have problems," the girl said matter-of-factly. "Things go missing and there are noises." "Lucy, that's quite enough," Miss Bramley said, appearing with surprising swiftness. You shouldn't bother the visitors with nonsense. It's not nonsense, Lucy insisted, but she subsided when the nurse gave her a quelling look. Children have such vivid imaginations, Miss Bramley said to Tuppence, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. They tell stories to each other and then half believe them. Of course, Tuppence agreed pleasantly, though sometimes children notice things adults miss. Don't you find? Miss Bramley's smile grew more strained. If you'll excuse me, I must attend to the younger ones. She moved away quickly, and Tommy raised an eyebrow at his wife. Touched a nerve there, old thing. Didn't I just? She's frightened of something. The question is whether she's frightened of the mysterious occurrences or frightened of us discovering something specific. A commotion near the toy chest drew their attention. A boy of about 9 was pulling toys out with increasing agitation, tossing them aside carelessly. It's gone, he muttered. I left it right here, and now it's gone. What's gone, Timothy? Miss Bramley asked, hurrying over. My soldier? The one with the blue coat? I put it away properly yesterday. I did. Perhaps another child borrowed it, Miss Bramley suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Nobody borrows things without asking, Timothy insisted. That's the rule. Someone took it. The other children had grown quiet, watching the scene with expressions ranging from sympathy to something that looked almost like fear. Tommy found this reaction more interesting than the missing toy itself. Things do have a way of, turning up, he said easily, approaching the toy chest. I once lost my favorite pen for 3 weeks, only to find it had fallen behind my desk. He knelt beside the chest, making a show of examining its contents while actually studying the area around it. A scrap of fabric, navy blue and slightly frayed, lay wedged between the chest and the wall. He palmed it smoothly before standing. I'm sure your soldier will appear, he told Timothy. These things usually do. The boy looked unconvinced, but nodded reluctantly. As playtime continued, Tommy and Tuppence positioned themselves near different parts of the room, observing. The pattern became clear enough. Certain children avoided the locked cupboard entirely, while others seemed drawn to it, including Lucy, who contrived to drop her pencil near it and spent rather longer than necessary retrieving it. Then there were the whispers, nothing as dramatic as Mr. Lang had described, but a constant undertone of furtive communication between the children. They spoke in fragments, glancing frequently at Miss Bramley to ensure she wasn't listening. Did you hear it last night? Shh, don't talk about it. But I heard it too. From the walls. Tommy, passing close enough to catch this exchange, filed it away. Sounds from the walls could mean many things, most of them perfectly ordinary, but combined with everything else, it suggested a pattern of nocturnal activity the children were aware of, but too frightened to report properly. Near the end of the session, Tuppence noticed something else. A small key had appeared on one of the windowsills, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. It wasn't the brass key she had found the previous day, but a different one, iron and older. She glanced around, but no one seemed to be watching her specifically. Nevertheless, she left it where it was for the moment, making a mental note of its position. When the children were dismissed for their midday meal, Tommy and Tuppence remained behind, ostensibly to discuss their observations with Miss Bramley. But the young woman had already vanished, leaving them alone in the nursery. Well, something has these children thoroughly spooked, Tuppence said. And the staff are either part of it or desperately trying to pretend nothing is wrong. That cupboard wants investigating. Locked. Unfortunately, though I suspect our brass key from yesterday might not fit, this lock looks older. Tommy produced the scrap of navy fabric he'd found. Recognize this? Tuppence examined it. Could be from anything. A coat, perhaps, or a scarf. The weave is decent quality, though. Not what I'd expect from an orphanage issue, which means it belonged to a visitor or a staff member, or was torn from clothing during some kind of struggle. You're very dramatic today. I'm inspired by the atmosphere. Gothic orphanage. Mysterious disappearances. Frightened children. It practically writes itself, Tommy smiled. That's my girl. Always seeing the theatrical potential in a mystery. They moved to the cupboard, examining it more closely now that they were alone. The scratches on the floor were definitely recent, and there was dust on top of the cupboard that showed finger marks, as though someone had steadied themselves there while standing on something to reach higher. Someone's been using this as a ladder, Tommy observed, or hiding something on top of it. A sound from the corridor made them step back quickly. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, her expression neutral but watchful. I trust the children weren't too troublesome? She asked. Not at all, Tuppence assured her. Most educational, though I couldn't help noticing they seem rather anxious. Is that typical? Mrs. Abernathy's jaw tightened slightly. Children in their circumstances often carry burdens we can only imagine. We do our best to provide stability, but one cannot erase their pasts entirely. Of course not, Tuppence agreed. I only wondered if recent events might have unsettled them further. There have been no recent events of consequence. The headmistress's tone brooked no argument. Now luncheon will be served shortly. You're welcome to join us in the staff dining room. She swept out, leaving Tommy and Tuppence to exchange glances. She's lying, Tommy said flatly. Undoubtedly. The question is, what exactly is she lying about? Everything, I suspect, or at least everything that matters. They left the nursery, but not before Tuppence retrieved the iron key from the windowsill. Whatever game was being played at St. Margaret's Orphanage, they were now unwilling participants, and Tommy and Tuppence had never been good at following rules they didn't understand. Tonight, Tuppence said quietly as they descended the stairs, we explore after dark, see what these whispers and mysterious sounds are really about. I was hoping you'd suggest that, though I draw the line at actual ghosts. Noted. If we encounter the supernatural, you're in charge of running away while I investigate. That seems fair. I've always been a very good runner. Their laughter echoed in the stairwell. A bright sound in the shadowy building. Somewhere above them, a door closed softly, as though someone had been listening. Chapter 4. A Missing Child. The alarm was raised just before 11 o'clock. Tommy and Tuppence were in the small office Mrs. Abernathy had designated for their use, reviewing their notes from the morning's observations. When they heard the commotion, running footsteps in the corridor, urgent voices, and then Miss Bramley's cry, high and frightened, "She's gone! Lucy's gone!" They reached the nursery within moments to find it in chaos. Miss Bramley stood in the center of the room, her face pale, while Mrs. Abernathy moved swiftly between the children, counting heads with increasing agitation. Mr. Lang hovered near the doorway, wringing his hands. "What's happened?" Tommy asked, though the answer seemed obvious enough. "Lucy Hartwell," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice tight with control. "She was here not 10 minutes ago. Miss Bramley went to fetch supplies from the cupboard, and when she returned, the child had vanished." "The same Lucy who spoke to us this morning?" "Yes." Mrs. Abernathy's expression suggested this detail was not lost on her. "I trust this is merely a game of hide-and-seek. Gone too far, but we must search." Immediately, Tommy was already examining the room with the systematic attention he'd learned from years of investigation. 3 doors led from the nursery, 1 to the main corridor, 1 to a small storage closet, and 1 to the adjoining playroom. The windows were closed and latched from the inside. "Miss Bramley," he said, "you were gone for how long exactly? 5 minutes, perhaps less?" The supply cupboard is just down the hall. Her hands twisted together. I would have noticed if she'd followed me. I'm certain of it. And the other children, did anyone see Lucy leave? The children, huddled together now in obvious distress, shook their heads. Timothy, the boy who'd lost his toy soldier, spoke up hesitantly. Lucy was by the window looking outside. That's the last I saw of her. Tommy moved to the window in question. The latch was secure, and snow had drifted against the outside sill, completely undisturbed. No one had exited through here. We should search the building, Tuppence said systematically, room by room. Mrs. Abernathy nodded curtly. Mr. Lang organized the search. Check every room, every closet. Mrs. Collins can manage the ground floor and kitchens. As the staff dispersed to begin searching, Tommy caught Tuppence's eye and jerked his head toward the corridor. They stepped outside together, out of earshot of the remaining children. What do you think? I think Lucy knew something, and someone wants to ensure she doesn't share it with us. The timing is too convenient. You don't believe she simply wandered off, do you? Tuppence shook her head. That child was frightened this morning, but she was also determined. She wanted to tell us something. If she's disappeared, it's either because she's been taken or because she's hiding deliberately. From what, though? Or from whom? They joined the search, taking the upper floors while others covered the lower levels. The attic stairs beckoned, but Mrs. Abernathy had specifically assigned Oliver to search there, so they moved through the bedrooms instead, checking under beds and behind doors. In Lucy's dormitory, a small room shared with 5 other girls, Tuppence found something interesting. Her coat was missing from Lucy's peg, though her outdoor boots remained neatly placed beneath it. She took her coat, Tuppence said, or someone took it for her. Tommy examined the boots more closely, but not her boots, which suggests either this was very hurried, or she hasn't actually gone outside, or she's wearing different shoes. They continued their search, moving methodically through the building. The search party called to each other from various locations, voices echoing through the corridors. No Lucy. After 20 minutes, Tommy suggested they examine the exterior. The snow had stopped falling temporarily, and the gray afternoon light illuminated the orphanage grounds with harsh clarity. Behind the building, near the old garden shed Oliver had mentioned, they found footprints, adult-sized, leading from a side door to the shed and back again. Recent enough that the snow hadn't yet filled them completely. Someone's been out here, Tommy said, following the tracks. Within the last hour or two. The shed door was closed but not locked. Tommy pushed it open, revealing a cluttered interior filled with gardening tools, old furniture, and stacks of terracotta pots. Nothing appeared disturbed, though it was difficult to tell in the general disorder. Lucy! Tuppence called into the dim space. Lucy, if you're here, you're not in trouble. We only want to help. Silence answered her. They were about to leave when Tommy noticed something. A mislaid coat wadded up behind a broken wheelbarrow. He pulled it out, recognizing the fabric immediately. It was too small for an adult, and it matched the description of orphanage issue. This could be hers, he said. But where is she? A bark interrupted them. They turned to find a large dog, some mixed breed with shaggy brown fur, bounding through the snow toward them. It wagged its tail enthusiastically, clearly delighted to have company. Hello there, Tuppence said, kneeling to let the animal sniff her hand. Where did you come from? Those footprints from earlier, Tommy said slowly. What if they were from whoever owns this dog? Someone taking it for a walk, perhaps. Which would mean the coat might have been here for days, not hours. They returned to the main building, the dog following hopefully until Oliver appeared and shooed it away with practiced efficiency. Inside, the search continued with increasing urgency. Mrs. Abernathy's composure was beginning to crack, and even the usually stolid Mrs. Collins looked worried. It was nearly noon when Timothy's voice rang out from the ground floor. "She's here! I found her." They rushed to the location, converging on the small parlor near the main entrance. Timothy stood, pointing at the heavy curtains that framed the tall windows. A pair of small feet protruded from behind the drapes. Mrs. Abernathy pulled back the curtain with more force than necessary. Lucy stood there, blinking in the sudden light, very much present and apparently unharmed. "Lucy Hartwell," the headmistress said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "What is the meaning of this?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Abernathy," Lucy said, her small voice steady despite the circumstances. "I didn't mean to frighten anyone. Why did you hide?" Tuppence asked gently, before Mrs. Abernathy could continue her rebuke. Lucy's eyes met hers, and in them was something that looked very much like calculation. "I wanted to see what would happen," the girl said. "I wanted to see who would look for me, and where they would look." "That's quite enough," Mrs. Abernathy snapped. "Lucy, you will go to your room immediately. No supper for you tonight, young lady." As Lucy was led away by Miss Bramley, Tommy caught the child's backward glance. She looked directly at him, and then deliberately shifted her gaze toward the ceiling, holding it there for a meaningful moment before disappearing around the corner. "Well?" Tuppence said once the excitement had died down and they were alone again. "That was enlightening, wasn't it? A false alarm, perhaps, but an instructive one. The coat in the shed was a red herring. The dog's footprints were a distraction. But Lucy's performance just now was entirely deliberate. She wanted to show us something," Tommy agreed. "The question is what?" That look at the ceiling was quite pointed. "The attic," Tuppence said. She was directing us to the attic. "Then that's where we'll look tonight, as planned. Though now I'm considerably more curious about what we'll find there." They returned to their office, both acutely aware that the game at St. Margaret's had just shifted into a new phase. Lucy hadn't disappeared by accident, nor had she been taken. She'd staged her own vanishing to send them a message. Whatever secrets the orphanage held, at least one child was determined they should discover them. Chapter 5: Clues in the Playroom. The afternoon settled into an uneasy calm following Lucy's reappearance. Mrs. Abernathy had retreated to her office with a headache, leaving the daily routines to resume under Miss Bramley's supervision. Tommy and Tuppence, ostensibly reviewing their notes, were in fact planning their evening investigation when a thought struck Tuppence. "The playroom," she said suddenly. "We've looked at it, but we haven't really examined it properly." Tommy glanced up from the sketch he'd been making of the building's layout. "You think there's something we missed?" Lucy was very deliberate this morning. She dropped her pencil near that locked cupboard in the nursery. "What if there's a connection to the playroom? There are adjoining spaces, after all. Worth investigating before we tackle the attic tonight." They found the playroom empty, the children having been taken outdoors for a brief constitutional now that the snow had temporarily ceased. The room looked innocent enough in the afternoon light, toys arranged on shelves, small tables and chairs positioned neatly. But Tommy and Tuppence had learned that the most ordinary spaces often held the most interesting secrets. Tuppence moved to the toy chest where Timothy had discovered his missing soldier was gone. She knelt beside it, examining the contents more carefully than Tommy had managed during the morning's commotion. "There's writing here," she said, tilting her head to read marks scratched into the inside of the chest lid. "Very faint. Looks like someone used a nail or sharp object." Tommy joined her, squinting at the crude letters. "Can you make it out?" "SEC, secret? And below it, MET. Secret, meet it. Well, that's suggestively vague." Tuppence ran her fingers along the bottom of the chest, finding nothing but the expected jumble of toys. She was about to close the lid when Tommy stopped her. "Wait, look at the depth. He was right. The inside of the chest appeared shallower than the outside dimensions suggested. Tommy tapped the bottom, producing a hollow sound. "False bottom," Tuppence said with satisfaction. "Now how does one open it?" They examined the chest from every angle until Tommy discovered a small notch in the back corner. A gentle push released a catch, and the false bottom lifted to reveal a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay a collection of small objects. A child's drawing showing what appeared to be a building with an X marked on one section, several folded notes written in different childish hands, and a piece of paper that looked more official, torn from a larger document. Tommy unfolded one of the notes. "Tomorrow night, usual place. Bring blankets." "Someone's been organizing something," Tuppence said, examining the drawing. "And unless I'm very mistaken, this X marks the attic. See, that's the roof line." The official-looking paper proved more interesting still. It was a fragment of what appeared to be a supply requisition, listing quantities of food well beyond what would be needed for the orphanage's current population. "Extra provisions," Tommy observed. "Either someone's been pilfering from the stores, or there are more mouths to feed than Mrs. Abernathy has admitted to." A sound from the corridor sent them scrambling to replace everything and close the chest. Mrs. Collins appeared in the doorway, her capable face showing surprise at finding them there. "Begging your pardon," she said. "I didn't realize anyone was in here. I came to retrieve a bucket the children left behind." "No trouble at all," Tuppence said easily. "We were just admiring the organization of the space. You keep everything very tidy." Mrs. Collins's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation, but she merely nodded and collected the bucket from near the window. As she turned to leave, Tommy noticed sand scattered on the floor near where the bucket had been. "Has someone been playing in the sand table?" he asked. "Not that I know of," Mrs. Collins said, frowning. "The children aren't permitted sand in winter. Too much mess when it mixes with snow from their boots." After she left, Tuppence knelt to examine the scattered sand. "This wasn't here this morning. I'm certain of it. Which means someone's been in here during the afternoon while everyone was occupied with Lucy's disappearance. Convenient timing for whoever wanted access to this room. Unobserved, they continued their examination with renewed purpose. The sand trail led toward one of the walls where blocks had been stacked in what appeared to be an arbitrary pattern. But when Tommy moved them aside, he discovered fresh scratches on the wall behind them. "Someone's been trying to pry this panel loose," he said. "Recently, too. Look at the wood splinters." He pressed against the panel experimentally. It shifted slightly, suggesting it wasn't as firmly attached as it should be. With careful maneuvering, he managed to create a gap large enough to peer through. "There's space behind here," he reported. "Looks like it might connect to the area between walls. Large enough for a child to squeeze through, perhaps?" "A secret passage," Tuppence mused. "More likely just access to the building's infrastructure, but certainly large enough for small people to use if they knew about it." Tuppence was examining the overturned toy chest more carefully now, noting how its position had changed slightly from where it had been that morning. Someone moved this, used it as a step, possibly to reach something higher. She climbed carefully onto the chest and stretched upward, running her hands along the top of the nearby bookshelf. Her fingers encountered paper, and she pulled down a note that had been concealed there. The message was brief and written in an adult hand. "Tonight. After midnight. Be silent." "Well," Tommy said, reading over her shoulder, "that rather settles the question of whether we should investigate tonight, doesn't it? Someone's planning something for after midnight. The question is, who and what?" They heard footsteps approaching and quickly returned the note to its hiding place. Miss Bramley entered, leading the children back from their outdoor exercise. The young woman's eyes went immediately to Tommy and Tuppence, and a flicker of something, perhaps anxiety, crossed her face. I hope we're not in your way, Tuppence said pleasantly. Of course, Miss Bramley said, though her tone suggested she found their presence inconvenient. Children, settle down now. Time for quiet reading. As the children filed in, Tommy noticed several of them glancing toward the toy chest, then quickly away. They knew about the hidden compartment, clearly. The question was whether they were protecting someone, or were themselves protected by whoever had organized these secret meetings. Lucy entered last, still subdued from her punishment, but managing to catch Tuppence's eye. The child's gaze traveled deliberately from Tuppence to the toy chest, to the wall panel, and back again. It was as clear a message as if she'd spoken aloud. You're on the right track. Tommy and Tuppence excused themselves, retreating to their office to discuss their discoveries, hidden messages, secret meetings, extra food provisions, and passages between walls, Tommy summarized. This orphanage is busier at night than it is during the day. I suspect someone's been using the children as messengers, or the children themselves are organizing something. Either way, tonight should prove enlightening. Provided we're not caught skulking about by Mrs. Abernathy. I don't fancy explaining to her that we're investigating secret midnight meetings. Then we'll simply have to avoid being caught. You're quite good at being stealthy when you try, darling. High praise indeed, Tommy grinned, though I noticed you're volunteering me for the dangerous work. Naturally. That's what husbands are for. And here I thought it was my sparkling wit and devastating charm you married me for. Those two, I suppose, Tuppence replied, though the wit is debatable. Their laughter was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. When Tommy opened it, he found no one there. But on the floor lay a small piece of paper. Folded carefully, the message inside was simple. The attic. Midnight. Come alone. Tommy showed it to Tuppence, who raised an eyebrow. Well, it seems we're expected. The question is, by whom? Friend or foe? I suppose we'll find out at midnight. Do bring that sensible torch you packed, won't you? Always prepared. That's me. Let's hope your preparedness extends to dealing with whatever we find up there. My dear Tuppence, when has it not? She smiled at him, the particular smile that meant they were truly engaged in the chase now. Whatever St. Margaret's orphanage was hiding, they were about to uncover it. Chapter 6. Secrets of the Attic. The orphanage settled into sleep with agonizing slowness. Tommy and Tuppence waited in their room, fully dressed in dark clothing, listening to the gradual cessation of sounds that marked the household's retirement. Footsteps faded, doors closed, voices fell silent. By 11, only the wind outside and the occasional creak of old timbers disturbed the quiet. Ready? Tommy whispered, checking his pocket watch by the light of their single candle. Tuppence nodded, pulling on her gloves. Let's see what secrets this attic holds. They moved through the darkened corridors with practiced stealth. Tommy's electric torch provided minimal illumination. The attic stairs were located at the far end of the building, accessed through a narrow door they'd noted during their earlier explorations. The door stood slightly ajar, which gave Tommy pause. Someone's preceded us, he murmured, or left it open deliberately, as an invitation. The stairs were steep and narrow, climbing into darkness that seemed to resist even the torch's beam. At the top, they emerged into a space that sprawled the length of the building, filled with the accumulated detritus of decades. Old furniture loomed in shadowy masses. Trunks were stacked haphazardly, and cobwebs draped from the rafters like abandoned curtains. The dust showed footprints immediately, multiple sets, some small enough to be children's, others adult-sized. The traffic appeared recent, disturbing the thick layer that had settled over everything. Popular place, Tuppence observed quietly. They followed the main track through the clutter, Tommy keeping the torch beam low to avoid advertising their presence. The attic was divided into sections by the building's structural beams, creating alcoves and corners that could conceal almost anything. In the first alcove, they discovered old trunks, most locked, some with hasps broken. Tommy knelt to examine one that appeared to have been opened recently. Inside lay children's belongings from years past, faded clothing, worn toys, a few tattered books. Nothing remarkable, he said, but Tuppence had moved ahead, drawn by something she had spotted. "Tommy, look at this." She stood before a large trunk pushed against the far wall. Unlike the others, this one appeared to have been moved repeatedly. Scratch marks on the floor told the story of its journeys, and when Tommy examined it closely, he found the lock had been tampered with recently, and clumsily. "Shall we?" he asked. The lock gave way with minimal effort, and they lifted the heavy lid. Inside, carefully arranged, lay a collection that made them both pause. Blankets, several of them, newer than anything else in the attic, a bundle of candles, tins of biscuits and preserved foods, a small collection of books whose spines showed recent handling. "Someone's been living up here," Tuppence said. "Or preparing to," Tommy suggested. "Or supplying someone who's hiding nearby." He lifted the blankets carefully and found beneath them something more interesting still. A journal bound in cheap leather, its pages covered in cramped handwriting. Tommy angled his torch to read the first entry. The writing was adult, educated, and deeply worried. It spoke of children in danger, of decisions made years ago that had come back to haunt the writer, of someone called only the visitor, who had arrived 6 weeks prior and changed everything. "This is explosive," Tommy said, flipping through the pages. "Listen to this. I cannot protect them all. The visitor knows too much. If the authorities discover what we've done, everything we've built will crumble." "Who wrote it?" Tuppence asked, but the journal bore no signature, no indication of authorship beyond the educated hand. A sound from below froze them both, footsteps climbing the stairs. Tommy doused the torch instantly, plunging them into darkness. They crouched behind the trunk, barely breathing. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, paused. A different light appeared, the warm glow of a candle. Someone moved through the attic with the confidence of familiarity, and Tommy risked a glimpse around the trunk's edge. It was Oliver, the groundskeeper, carrying a canvas bag that clinked softly with each step. He moved to a different section of the attic, one they hadn't yet explored, and knelt beside what appeared to be a concealed hatch in the floor. "Should we confront him?" Tuppence breathed in Tommy's ear. Before he could answer, another sound reached them, a child's voice, very quiet, coming from the direction of the hatch. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Oliver's response was too low to hear, but he reached into the bag and pulled out items that he passed down through the hatch. The transaction was brief, and then Oliver was moving back toward the stairs, his candle casting wild shadows. They waited until his footsteps had faded completely before moving. "That hatch," Tommy said. "Someone's down there." They found it easily now that they knew where to look. It was cunningly concealed beneath a false floorboard, and when Tommy lifted it, they discovered a ladder. Descending into darkness, the space below appeared to be the gap between the attic floor and the ceiling of the rooms. Below, a structural void perhaps 2 feet high. "You can't seriously expect me to go down there," Tuppence whispered. "I certainly don't expect you to wait up here alone." The space was cramped and uncomfortable, but Tommy's torch revealed a narrow crawlway that led toward the center of the building. They followed it, dust coating their clothing, until it opened into a slightly larger space where the chimneys rose through the structure. Here they found evidence of recent occupation, a blanket spread on the boards, a candle stub, and most tellingly, a ribbon. Tommy picked it up, recognizing it immediately. This matches the one from Lucy's coat, the coat we found in the shed. So she has been up here, or someone wearing her ribbon has? But the space was currently empty. Whoever had been using it had vanished. Tommy noticed something else, though the faint smell of ink, stronger here than anywhere else in the attic. "There's another journal," Tuppence said, finding it wedged between two beams. This one was newer, the writing different, younger. A child's diary, filled with observations and fears. They had no time to read it properly. Voices rose from somewhere below, urgent and sharp. Mrs. Abernathy's voice, unmistakable even through the floors, raised in what sounded like argument. "We need to leave," Tommy said. "Now." They retreated through the crawl space, replaced the hatch covering, and were halfway to the stairs when they heard someone else ascending. No time to hide properly. They pressed into the shadows behind a tall wardrobe, hoping the darkness would conceal them. Mr. Lang appeared, breathing heavily, carrying a lamp that illuminated his worried face. He moved directly to the trunk they'd examined, opened it, and checked the contents with obvious relief. Then he noticed the journal lying where Tommy had left it, rather than hidden beneath the blankets. "No," he whispered. No, he snatched it up, pressed it to his chest, and stood frozen, clearly calculating. After a long moment, he returned everything to the trunk, locked it with a key from his pocket, and hurried back toward the stairs. "Well," Tuppence breathed once he was gone. "Mr. Lang is definitely involved in whatever's happening here, and apparently quite anxious to keep those journals hidden. Pity we didn't have time to read more of them. I memorized several passages from the child's diary. We can discuss them once we're safely back in our room." They waited another quarter-hour before risking their return, taking a different route that led them through the unused servants' quarters. By the time they reached their room, it was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were thoroughly covered in dust. "That was illuminating," Tommy said, brushing cobwebs from his jacket. "Someone's living in the walls. Oliver is supplying them, Mr. Lang is protecting something in those journals, and the children know more than they're saying. Tomorrow, we piece together what we learned. Tonight, I suggest we both get some sleep." "Agreed. Though I doubt I'll manage much knowing what we've discovered." Tommy smiled in the darkness. "My dear Tuppence, that's half the fun of detection, isn't it? The sleepless nights wondering what it all means." "You have a peculiar definition of fun, darling. Perhaps. But you wouldn't have it any other way." "No," she admitted. "I wouldn't." Chapter 7. The Hidden Letter. Morning arrived with the reluctant gray light typical of February, and Tommy woke to find Tuppence already dressed, sitting at the small table by the window, scribbling notes furiously. "You're up early," he observed, reaching for his dressing gown. "Couldn't sleep. Too much rattling around in my head. I've been writing down everything we discovered last night before the details fade." Tommy joined her at the table, reading over her shoulder. She had organized their findings methodically. The journals in the trunk, Oliver's midnight delivery, the ribbon matching Lucy's coat, Mr. Lang's anxious behavior, and the hidden space between the walls. "We need to search the rest of the building more thoroughly," Tuppence said. "There must be other clues we've missed. Letters, documents, something that explains what's really happening here." They dressed quickly and descended to breakfast, where they found Mrs. Collins alone in the staff dining room, preparing tea with her usual efficiency. "Early risers," she observed. "There's porridge on the stove if you'd like some." As Tuppence poured tea, Tommy noticed Mrs. Collins watching them with an expression that suggested calculation. The woman knew something. He was certain of it. "Mrs. Collins," he said conversationally, You've been here quite a long time, haven't you? 15 years this spring, she replied. Seen children come and go, staff changes, all manner of things. Then you'd remember when the building was renovated? The spaces between the walls? That sort of infrastructure work? Her hand stilled momentarily over the teacups. Why do you ask? Merely curious. Old buildings often have fascinating histories. The structures are sound enough, she said, her tone careful. Though there are spaces, certainly. Access points for repairs and such. Mr. Lang would know more about that than I would. After breakfast, Tommy and Tuppence began their search in earnest. They started with the ground floor, examining the common rooms more carefully than before. It was in the small parlor, the same one where Lucy had been discovered hiding, behind the curtains, that Tuppence made the discovery. Tommy, come look at this. She stood before the fireplace, running her hands along the bricks around it. One brick, slightly different in color from the others, shifted under her touch. It's loose, she said, working it free carefully. Behind it, a small cavity had been hollowed out, and within lay a letter, folded and yellowed with age. Tommy extracted it gently. The paper was of good quality, the handwriting elegant, but showing signs of haste. The date at the top read, March 1923, nearly 2 years prior. He read aloud, My dearest Margaret, I write this in desperation, knowing you alone might understand. The decision we made was necessary then, but I fear its consequences now. The child must be protected at all costs. If anyone discovers the truth, everything we've built will be destroyed. I trust you to keep our secret as you always have. Burn this letter once you've read it. Your devoted friend, E.E., Tuppence repeated. Could be anyone, Edward, Elizabeth, Elena, but Margaret, Tommy said thoughtfully. St. Margaret's Orphanage, named after someone, presumably. Could this Margaret be Mrs. Abernethy's first name? Possible. Though it's a common enough name, it could refer to anyone associated with the orphanage. They studied the letter more carefully. The paper showed signs of having been handled repeatedly, unfolded and refolded many times, which suggested Mrs. Abernethy, if she was the Margaret in question, had not burned it as instructed. The child must be protected, Tuppence said. That suggests someone specific, not the orphans in general, and something that happened in 1923, 2 years ago. What child arrived here then? Or what child was already here? A sound from the corridor sent them both moving swiftly. Tommy returned the letter to its hiding place and replaced the brick just as Miss Bramley appeared in the doorway. Oh, she said, startled. I didn't realize anyone was in here. Just admiring the architecture, Tommy said easily. These old fireplaces are remarkably well made. Miss Bramley's gaze went to the fireplace, then back to them, suspicion clear in her eyes. Mrs. Abernethy wishes to see you both in her office immediately. They followed her through the corridors, exchanging glances. Had someone observed their nighttime excursion, or was this about something else entirely? Mrs. Abernethy sat behind her desk, her expression more strained than usual. Mr. Lang stood near the window, his nervous energy palpable. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, the headmistress began without preamble. Mr. Lang has informed me that he heard sounds in the attic last night. Someone was moving about up there well after midnight. How concerning, Tuppence said blandly. Indeed. I trust it wasn't either of you. We retired early, Tommy said. The day had been rather exhausting. Mrs. Abernethy's lips thinned. I see. Well, someone was up there, Mr. Lang is quite certain. Perhaps one of the children? Tuppence suggested. They do sometimes wander at night, don't they? Mr. Lang shifted uncomfortably. The attic door is kept locked. But it was unlocked when you went to investigate, Tommy asked innocently. The caretaker's face flushed. Ah, yes. Which suggests someone with a key accessed it. How many keys are there? Tuppence inquired. 3, Mrs. Abernathy said. Mine, Mr. Lang's, and one kept in the office safe. All accounted for. Yes, Tuppence said. But keys can be copied, I suppose. After they were dismissed, Tommy and Tuppence retreated to their room to discuss these new developments. She's lying, Tuppence said flatly. About the keys, about something. Did you see how she glanced at Mr. Lang when I asked about them? I did. They're protecting something, together or someone. That letter mentioned a child who must be protected. What if that child is here in this building and the staff have been hiding them? From whom, though, and why? Tuppence pulled out the notes she had made that morning. The journals mentioned someone called the visitor who arrived 6 weeks ago. What if this visitor is searching for the child mentioned in the letter? That would explain the increased tension, the mysterious occurrences, everything. The staff are trying to keep the child hidden while dealing with this visitor's presence. But who is the visitor? We've met everyone here, surely, Tommy frowned. Have we? We've met the staff, the children, we've seen. But what if someone else has been here? Someone not officially connected to the orphanage? A knock at the door interrupted them. When Tommy opened it, he found Lucy standing there, her small face determined. I need to tell you something, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder nervously. About the letter, the one behind the brick. How did you know about that? Tuppence asked gently. I saw you. I've been watching. We've all been watching. Lucy stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Mrs. Abernathy is my grandmother. The letter was written to her about me. I'm the child who must be protected. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Your grandmother, Tommy said carefully. Yes, but no one knows. She took me in as an orphan when my mother died, but she's kept it secret because... Lucy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because my father is searching for me and he's dangerous. He's been here in the orphanage, pretending to be someone else, and I think he's found out who I am. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a look that communicated volumes. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture far more complex and dangerous than they had initially imagined. Lucy, Tuppence said gently, you need to tell us everything, from the beginning. The girl nodded, settling into a chair, and began to speak. Chapter 8. The Stormy Chase. Lucy's story had taken less than 15 minutes to tell, but it changed everything. Her father, a man named Edward Hartwell, had been violent and unpredictable. When Lucy's mother died 2 years ago, Mrs. Abernathy had taken her granddaughter in secretly, listing her as just another orphan to keep her safe from her father, who had terrified both mother and daughter. He's been here, Lucy repeated, her small hands clenched in her lap. I've seen him. He's pretending to be someone else, but I recognized his voice. Who? Tommy asked urgently. Which of the staff? But before Lucy could answer, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the building. The storm that had been threatening all morning had finally arrived in force, bringing with it winds that rattled the windows and snow that fell in blinding sheets. Lucy jumped to her feet, her face pale. The outbuilding, that's where he's been staying. He told Oliver to keep supplies there for him. If the storm gets worse, he might try to move now while everyone's distracted. We need to inform Mrs. Abernathy, Tuppence said. No. Lucy's voice was sharp with panic. He said if anyone interfered, he'd burn the whole place down. He's mad enough to do it. You have to catch him before he realizes we know. Tommy was already pulling on his coat. Stay here, Lucy. Lock the door after us. I'm coming with you, the girl insisted. Absolutely not, Tuppence said firmly. This is too dangerous. We'll handle this. They left Lucy reluctantly, locking the door behind them, and made their way downstairs. The storm had driven everyone inside, and the corridors were eerily empty. Through the windows, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The world beyond reduced to whirling white chaos. "The outbuilding behind the gardens," Tommy said. "The one where we found the coat." They bundled into their heaviest outdoor clothing and stepped out into the maelstrom. The wind hit them immediately, bitter and fierce, driving snow into their faces with stinging force. Tommy took Tuppence's arm, and together they pushed forward, following the path they'd taken 2 days earlier. The footprints they'd seen then were long obliterated, but new ones appeared, already filling with snow, but still visible enough to follow. Someone had walked this way recently, within the last hour. "Look!" Tuppence shouted over the wind, pointing. A scarf had snagged on a fence post, whipping in the gale. It was wool, dark blue, and certainly not orphanage issue. Tommy pulled it free, noting the quality. Expensive. Not something a groundskeeper would wear, they pressed on. The outbuilding materialized through the snow like a ghost. The door stood partially open, snow drifting inside. Tommy approached cautiously, gesturing for Tuppence to stay behind him. The interior was dark and cluttered, much as they'd seen before. But now there were clear signs of habitation: a bedroll in the corner, food tins stacked on a shelf, a lantern still warm to the touch. "He's been living here," Tommy said quietly. "Right under everyone's noses." "Tommy, look at this," Tuppence said. She had moved to the far wall where papers had been tacked up. Sketches of the orphanage, maps of the interior, notes in a tight, controlled hand detailing the daily routines and the locations of all the children. One child's name was circled repeatedly: Lucy Hartwell. "He's been planning this for weeks," Tuppence said, watching, learning the patterns. A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps crunching through the snow. Tommy doused his torch and pulled Tuppence behind a stack of crates. The door swung wider, and a figure entered, brushing snow from his coat. In the dim light, Tommy couldn't make out his face, but the build was familiar. The man moved to the bedroll, began gathering items quickly and efficiently. "Now or never," Tommy whispered. They emerged from their hiding place. "I think you should explain yourself," Tommy said clearly. The man spun around, and even in the shadows, Tommy could see the resemblance to Lucy in the shape of his face, the set of his jaw. Edward Hartwell was younger than Tommy had expected, perhaps 35, with the sort of refined features that would make him forgettable in a crowd. His eyes, however, were desperate and dangerous. "You're the investigators," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Oliver mentioned you. I'd hoped to be gone before you figured it out." "Where's Lucy?" Tommy asked, though he knew she was safe in their locked room. "Not where I can reach her, clearly. My own daughter, and they've kept her from me for 2 years. His hands clenched. "I have a right to see her." "You have no rights," Tuppence said coldly. "Not after what you did to her mother." "You know nothing about that." His voice rose. "Nothing about what my wife put me through. The lies she told, the way she poisoned Lucy against me." "Is that why you've been terrorizing this orphanage?" Tommy asked. "Moving things, hiding in the walls, frightening children? I needed to find her. They wouldn't tell me where she was, so I had to search." He took a step forward. "And now you're going to tell me which child she is." "We're telling you nothing," Tommy said firmly, "except that you need to leave. The authorities will be contacted." Hartwell laughed, a sound without humor. "In this storm, you can't even reach the village." "No, I think I'll simply take what's mine and go." He moved with sudden violence, shoving Tommy hard against the crates. Tommy stumbled, and Hartwell lunged for the door. But Tuppence was faster, swinging a heavy spade that had been leaning against the wall. It connected with Hartwell's shoulder, sending him staggering. "Run, Tommy!" she shouted. They burst out into the storm together, Hartwell close behind. The snow had intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet. Tommy grabbed Tuppence's hand, pulling her toward the main building. Behind them, Hartwell's voice rose above the wind. "You can't protect her forever. She's my daughter." They ran, slipping on the icy ground, the building seeming impossibly far away. Tommy glanced back once and saw Hartwell had stopped, bent over as though in pain from where the spade had struck him. They reached the side door and tumbled through, slamming it behind them. Mr. Lang stood in the corridor, his eyes wide with shock. "Lock this door," Tommy commanded. "Now and every other entrance to the building. What's happened?" "Edward Hartwell is outside. He's been living in the outbuilding. He's Lucy's father, and he's dangerous." Mr. Lang's face went white. "Dear God, I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined." "You supplied him," Tuppence accused. "Through Oliver. The midnight deliveries." "No, I mean Oliver did, but I didn't know who he was supplying. Oliver said it was a vagrant, someone who needed help until the weather improved. I gave him some old food supplies, nothing more." "I swear I didn't know," Tommy believed him. "The caretaker was many things, but he wasn't a conspirator in child endangerment." "Gather the staff," Tommy said. "We need to secure the building. He may try to get in." As Mr. Lang hurried away, Tommy and Tuppence made their way back to their room. Lucy opened the door at Tommy's knock, her face anxious. "Did you see him?" "We saw him," Tuppence confirmed gently. "And he won't be getting anywhere near you. I promise." Through the window, they could see the outbuilding barely visible through the storm. A figure emerged, staggering through the snow, heading not toward the orphanage but away from it, disappearing into the white wilderness. "He's leaving," Tommy said. "In this storm, on foot, injured. He won't get far." "We should send someone after him," Tuppence said. "He'll freeze to death out there." In this weather, anyone who goes after him would be in as much danger. Tommy moved to the window. "We'll wait until the storm passes, then organize a proper search." But even as he spoke, he wondered if Edward Hartwell would survive the night, and whether, despite everything, that was what they should hope for. Chapter 9. The Culprit Unmasked. The storm raged through the afternoon and into the evening, but by nightfall it had begun to exhaust itself. The wind dropped to a whisper, and the snow ceased its relentless assault. By morning, the world outside lay buried beneath a white shroud, pristine and deceptively peaceful. Tommy stood at the window, watching as the first gray light revealed the transformed landscape. "They found him," he said quietly. Tuppence joined him. Two figures were making their way back from the woods, carrying a third between them, Oliver and Mr. Lang, bearing Edward Hartwell's body. He had made it perhaps half a mile before the cold had claimed him. "How terrible," Tuppence murmured. "Despite everything, what a terrible end. He chose it himself. He could have stayed, could have surrendered. Pride and desperation make poor companions." By 9 o'clock, the entire household had been assembled in the main hall. Mrs. Abernathy stood at the front, her composure visibly shaken. The children sat in neat rows, subdued and watchful. Miss Bramley and Mrs. Collins flanked the headmistress, while Mr. Lang and Oliver stood near the door, still showing the effects of their grim morning work. Tommy and Tuppence had requested this gathering, and Mrs. Abernathy, recognizing she had little choice, had agreed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tommy began, his voice carrying easily in the large space. "We've been here 3 days, investigating what initially appeared to be minor disturbances. What we've uncovered is considerably more complex." He moved to the center of the room, Tuppence beside him, presenting their findings as they had done many times before. "Edward Hartwell came to this orphanage 6 weeks ago, not openly, but secretly, living in the outbuilding and occasionally hiding in the spaces between the walls. His purpose was singular, to find his daughter, Lucy, whom he believed was hidden here. Lucy, sitting with the other children, kept her eyes fixed on her lap. But Mr. Hartwell didn't work alone, Tuppence said, picking up the narrative. He needed someone inside the orphanage to help him, someone who could provide supplies, information about the daily routines, and most importantly, someone who could move freely without arousing suspicion. She turned to Oliver, whose face had gone pale. Oliver provided the supplies, Tommy said. The missing food from the kitchen, the blankets from the attic, the information about which children slept where. He facilitated everything. I didn't know what he wanted it for, Oliver burst out. He said he was a government inspector checking on conditions. He paid me well, and I thought I was helping ensure the orphanage passed inspection. I swear I didn't know he was after a child. Perhaps, Tuppence said. Though you must have suspected something when items began disappearing and children reported hearing sounds in the walls. Oliver's head dropped. I thought maybe he was just thorough. By the time I realized something was wrong, I was in too deep. He said if I told anyone, he'd claim I was part of a conspiracy to hide orphans from their rightful parents. Classic manipulation, Tommy observed, making an accomplice feel equally guilty. But there's more to this story, isn't there, Mr. Lang? The caretaker flinched as all eyes turned to him. Mr. Lang knew about the hidden spaces between walls, Tommy continued. He maintained the building, after all. He'd noticed the signs of someone using those spaces, the disturbed dust, the moved panels, the footprints where there shouldn't be any, but he said nothing. I thought it was children playing, Mr. Lang protested weakly. I didn't want to get them in trouble. You thought nothing of the sort, Tuppence said, her voice sharp. You knew something was wrong, but you were too frightened to act. Frightened of what might be discovered, frightened of losing your position, frightened of taking responsibility. Mr. Lang's shoulders sagged in defeat. And then there's Mrs. Abernathy, Tommy said, turning to the headmistress. Who knew from the beginning that her granddaughter was in danger? A collective gasp rose from the assembled staff and children. Lucy Hartwell is your granddaughter, Tommy continued. You took her in 2 years ago when your daughter died. You disguised her as just another orphan to protect her from a father who had been violent toward both mother and child. Mrs. Abernathy's rigid composure finally cracked. What else could I do? The courts wouldn't help. He had rights, they said, legal rights to his daughter. Despite everything he'd done, I couldn't let him take her. So you hid her in plain sight, Tuppence said more gently now. A clever solution, but one that required constant vigilance and secrecy. When Edward Hartwell began searching for her, you couldn't go to the authorities without revealing what you'd done. I only wanted to keep her safe, Mrs. Abernathy whispered. But your silence endangered everyone, Tommy said. The children were frightened. The staff were confused and suspicious. And Edward Hartwell grew more desperate, more dangerous. There's one more person who helped, Tuppence said. Someone who genuinely wanted to protect Lucy, who organized the children to watch and warn each other, who left clues for us to find because she knew we could help. She smiled at Lucy. You were very brave and very clever. Lucy managed a small smile in return. The secret meetings, mentioned in the hidden notes, Tommy explained to the room. Those were Lucy organizing the other children to keep watch, to report any suspicious activity. The children became her network of protection. I couldn't tell them everything, Lucy said quietly, but I told them enough. They helped me hide when he was searching, warned me when Oliver was acting strangely, and made sure someone was always watching. The staged disappearance yesterday, Tuppence said. That was your way of showing us how the children could vanish and reappear, demonstrating that someone knew the building's hidden spaces. I hoped you'd understand. Lucy confirmed. Tommy addressed the room. So we have a constellation of actions, some well-meaning, some cowardly, some manipulated. Oliver, frightened and deceived, supplied Edward Hartwell. Mr. Lang, too timid to confront what he suspected, allowed it to continue. Mrs. Abernathy, desperate to protect her granddaughter, created a situation where truth couldn't be spoken. And Lucy, brave beyond her years, tried to solve the problem herself. What happens now? Mrs. Collins asked, speaking for the first time. Now, Tuppence said, the truth is known. Lucy is safe. Edward Hartwell is dead, which is tragic despite his actions, and decisions must be made about how to proceed. Oliver will leave this employment, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly, finding some of her authority again. Mr. Lang, your position here will be reviewed. As for myself and Lucy, I place us at the mercy of whatever legal proceedings must follow. I suspect, Tommy said, that the authorities will be understanding given the circumstances. Edward Hartwell's history of violence can be documented. Your actions, while perhaps not strictly legal, were motivated by genuine concern for a child's welfare. And the other children? Miss Bramley asked. They've been through so much these past weeks. Children are resilient, Tuppence said. And they've learned something valuable. That secrets, however well-intentioned, often cause more problems than they solve, and that asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. The assembly began to disperse, conversations breaking out in hushed tones. Lucy approached Tommy and Tuppence, Mrs. Abernathy beside her. Thank you, the girl said simply. You saved yourself, really, Tommy told her. We just helped with the final pieces. Will I have to leave? Lucy asked her grandmother. I don't know, darling. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. No more secrets. As they walked away hand in hand, Tuppence leaned against Tommy. Rather a mess, wasn't it? She said, most mysteries are when you dig deep enough. People making complicated decisions for simple reasons. Still, we solved it. We did indeed, Tommy said. Though I could have done without the blizzard chase. Where's your sense of adventure, darling? Tommy smiled. I left it somewhere in that snowdrift, along with the feeling in my toes. Chapter 10. Return to Calm. 3 days after the revelations in the main hall, St. Margaret's Orphanage had begun to settle back into something resembling normality. The sun had emerged weakly but persistently, and children's laughter once again echoed through the corridors. The playground, cleared of its snow burden, hosted a spirited game of tag that suggested resilience was indeed a quality of youth. Tommy stood at the window of their room, watching the activity below, while Tuppence packed their modest luggage. Their work here was finished, the mysteries solved, and it was time to return to London. You're being contemplative, Tuppence observed, folding a scarf with practiced efficiency. Just thinking about how complicated people make things for themselves. Mrs. Abernathy could have sought legal help from the start, but she was convinced the system would fail Lucy, so she created an elaborate deception that nearly ended in disaster. Fear makes poor decisions seem reasonable, Tuppence said. At the time, she was a mother protecting her grandchild. I can't entirely fault her instincts, even if her methods were questionable. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Abernathy entered, looking considerably less severe than she had upon their arrival. The burden of secrecy lifted, she seemed almost a different person. I wanted to thank you properly before you departed, she said, and to tell you that I've spoken with the local magistrate. Given the circumstances and Edward Hartwell's documented history, there will be no charges. Lucy may remain here, officially recognized as my granddaughter now. I'm glad to hear it, Tommy said sincerely. She's a remarkable child. She'll do well with honesty as her foundation. I've learned that lesson rather thoroughly. Mrs. Abernathy managed a slight smile. The children have been asking if they might say goodbye. Would you mind? They descended to the main hall where the orphans had assembled with considerably more cheer than at the previous gathering. Lucy stood at the front, holding a drawing she'd made, depicting Tommy and Tuppence in heroic proportions, standing before the orphanage like guardian angels. "We made this for you," Lucy said, presenting it with ceremony. "So you'll remember us." "As if we could forget," Tuppence said warmly, accepting the gift. "You've all been splendid, brave and clever and wonderfully helpful." Timothy stepped forward next. "I found my soldier, by the way. It had fallen behind the radiator. I should have looked there first instead of making such a fuss." "Mysteries are often solved by looking in the obvious places we initially overlooked," Tommy told him. "Never apologize for thoroughness." The children gathered around, peppering them with questions about other mysteries they'd solved, whether they'd ever been truly frightened, and if they might return someday. Tommy and Tuppence fielded them with good humor, aware that for these children, they'd become characters in an adventure story with a satisfying ending. Mrs. Collins appeared with tea and biscuits, her capable manner unchanged by recent events. "You'll want something warm before traveling," she said. "Roads are still difficult." As they sat in the staff dining room for the last time, Mr. Lang appeared briefly, awkward and apologetic. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for not acting sooner, for letting my fears override my judgment. I've tendered my resignation." "Mrs. Abernathy refused it," Mrs. Collins interjected. "Told him he'd been foolish but not malicious, and that St. Margaret's needed people who'd learn from their mistakes rather than pretending they never made any." "Wise woman," Tuppence said. Oliver, they learned, had indeed departed, returning to his family in the north with the recommendation that he seek employment where his trusting nature wouldn't be so easily exploited. Miss Bramley had taken on additional responsibilities, rising to the challenge with surprising competence. "People reveal themselves in crisis," Tommy mused. "Not always as we'd predict." As they prepared to depart, Lucy found them one final time. "Will you tell me something honestly?" she asked. "If we can," Tuppence promised. "When you first arrived, did you think I was just a frightened child? Or did you know I was trying to help?" Tuppence knelt to the girl's level. "I thought you were extraordinarily brave. Frightened, yes, but using that fear to fuel action rather than paralysis. That's the mark of someone special, Lucy." "My father," Lucy said quietly. "I know I should feel sad that he's dead, but I mostly feel relieved." "Is that terrible?" "It's honest," Tommy said gently. "And honesty, as you've recently learned, is more valuable than comfortable pretense. You can mourn the father you wished you'd had while acknowledging relief that you're safe from the father you actually did have." "Both feelings can be true simultaneously," Lucy nodded, seeming to find comfort in this permission to feel complicated. Emotions. The carriage arrived promptly at 11 o'clock. The same vehicle that had brought them through the snow. 5 days earlier, the driver commented cheerfully on the improved weather, unaware of the drama that had unfolded during the storm. As they settled into their seats, Tommy pulled out the drawing Lucy had made. "We should frame this." "Absolutely. Pride of place in the sitting room, I think. A reminder of the orphanage mystery and of what we learned, which was," Tommy considered, "that the most dangerous secrets are often kept with the best intentions. The children are more observant than the adults credit them for. And that sometimes the real mystery isn't who did something, but why everyone conspired to keep it hidden." "Very philosophical, darling. The case has made you reflective. Every case teaches something. This one taught me that protection and imprisonment can look remarkably similar from certain angles." The carriage rolled forward, St. Margaret's Orphanage receding behind them. Through the rear window, they could see the children had gathered to wave farewell. a cluster of small figures against the white landscape. Do you suppose they'll be all right? Tuppence asked. I think they'll be better than all right. They've learned that problems can be solved, that help can be asked for, and that the truth, however uncomfortable, is preferable to comfortable deception. And Mrs. Abernathy will be a better guardian for having been forced to be honest. Lucy will grow up knowing her history, understanding it, rather than being haunted by half-truths and shadows. They rode in comfortable silence for a time, watching the countryside pass. The snow was already beginning to melt under the strengthening sun, revealing the brown earth beneath. You know what? Tuppence said suddenly. What's that? A nice, straightforward case next time. Perhaps a simple theft or a missing heirloom. Something that doesn't involve endangered children, violent fathers, and blizzards. Tommy laughed. My dear Tuppence, when have we ever had a straightforward case? There was that business with the missing cat, which turned out to involve a smuggling ring and a near collision with a freight train. The diplomatic reception with espionage, attempted assassination, and I seem to recall you had to climb out a third-story window. Tuppence sighed dramatically. Perhaps straightforward isn't our forte. Perhaps not. But would you really want it any other way? She smiled, that particular smile that meant she was already thinking about their next adventure. Not for the world, darling. Not for the world. The carriage rolled on toward London, carrying them away from solved mysteries and toward whatever awaited them next. Behind them, St. Margaret's Orphanage stood quiet in the winter sun, its secrets finally laid to rest, its children safe, and its future, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely hopeful. And in the playroom, carefully hidden once more in the toy chest's false bottom, the children had placed a new note. Thank you, Tommy and Tuppence. If you ever need our help, we'll be watching. After all, as Lucy had learned, sometimes the most ordinary people could become extraordinary allies when circumstances demanded.